Okay. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Bob Hemphill. I'm the author of a book called Platoon, Bravo Company. And you'll see where we got the title in a minute as we go along, I think. It's published by Sergeant Kirkland's Press down in Fredericksburg, Virginia. You know, when you go out somewhere to promote a book, when it's your first book, sometimes you're a little reluctant to toot your own horn, in effect, because you feel like you're bragging or something like that when you really don't want to. I've been told to toot loudly tonight, so... Huh? Toot your own horn. I'm sorry? I said I've been told to toot loudly tonight. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll give you a little bit of my credentials and my background to show you where I come from to write the book. I spent 25 years in the United States Army, retiring as Lieutenant Colonel in 1989. I spent 2 tours in Vietnam. My first tour, I was in 25th Infantry Division, which is where the tour of the book came from. During that time, which is 1967-68, I commanded Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry. And after my time in command, which was almost 5 months, then I went back to battalion staff and spent the rest of the tour as the S2 and then the S1 at the battalion. My second tour, I went to the Vietnamese side of the house, if you will, as an advisor. That was 70-71. I spent 4 months down on a province team in An Giang province in the town of Cà Mau, southernmost province in Vietnam, more Navy than Army, 2/3 underwater, and the only road in it was a road out, if that gives you an idea. That got a little boring, so after about 4 months there, I went to the 9th ARVN Division. ARVN's the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, 9th Vietnamese Division, as an advisor to the 3rd Battalion, 15th Regiment of the 9th ARVN Division, where I spent 6.5 months advising the Vietnamese. So that's my Vietnam experience. I won't go to my other 23 years or whatever it was. Most of them spent in Germany, but that is my Vietnam experience. My decorations from that time in Vietnam is I hold the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, 4 Bronze Stars, 2 for Valor, an Air Medal, a Purple Heart, an Army Commendation Medal for Valor, plus a lot of meritorious service awards for the rest of the career. So that's where I'm coming from when I talk. Now, I stand before you tonight a total failure. After 2 tours in Vietnam, I'm a veteran with 2 tours in Vietnam, 2 full tours. I retired Lieutenant Colonel, but I was a captain when I was in Vietnam, both tours. I am shaved. My hair is fairly short. I'm not wearing any parts of old Army uniforms. I do not suffer from any kind of post-Vietnam syndrome. I use that term instead of PTSD because it's a lot more encompassing than PTSD is. I have not suffered any effects of Agent Orange or even in my backyard Roundup or anything like that, or anything else someone can come up with. I'm not homeless. I'm not suicidal by any nature. I've had a fairly good marriage for the last 20 years. That means I haven't beat the wife, the dogs, the cats, or the horses. I won't talk about them beating me, but you know, that's different. I'm not an alcoholic, although I occasionally like a beer, a glass of wine, a wheat dram of single malt, something like that. But I know when to take it and when to leave it. I've had a rather productive career in the military, and since then, until I became a writer. We'll see how productive that becomes. In Vietnam, I didn't kill any innocent civilians, women, kids, anything like that. I didn't commit any atrocities of note. Didn't do anything, any of those things. My life was not in my company. I've never smoked a joint. I never used drugs other than what the doctor prescribed, or I got over the counter at your local giant pharmacy or somewhere like that. Huh? No, I saw nobody doing it. But I haven't been accused of any crimes other than occasional speeding ticket, parking ticket, that kind of thing. Nobody's beat down my door, and I've never barricaded myself in and held everybody off for hours. I draw disability from the VA for a broken back and screws in my leg, not a screwed up head. And I have general orders and official military records to support all my decorations and awards. I don't wear things that I'm not entitled to. Therefore, I'm a total failure as a Vietnam veteran, right? I can't possibly be a Vietnam veteran. I don't fit any of the stereotypes. But I tell you, folks, I and people like me represent the vast majority of the 2.7 million men and women actually stationed in Vietnam. The real story is the vast majority fit none of those stereotypes. The vast majority of folks came back to this country after Vietnam. Some of them stayed in the military, believe it or not, like me. Others got out, went back to their hometown, and became productive citizens in this society. They don't stand around at every Veterans Day and Memorial Day wearing grubby old fatigue parts, long beards, long hair, dirty, crying at the wall and stuff like that. And when somebody checks them out, checks their records, these guys were never in the Army or never in Vietnam. There's a new book out, in addition to mine. If you want to hear, huh? Against the law to wear medals, not against the law to cry at the wall. Well, nobody's going to prosecute them for saying, hey man, I was in Vietnam. If they come up wearing a full, correct military uniform of a captain or something like that, and they're not doing it, then they can be prosecuted for impersonating an officer. And there are people who have been. There are people who showed up or who have involved themselves in the community, pretending to be soldiers, wearing uniforms, wearing medals, wearing stuff like that finally were found out, and some of them are in jail now. Problem is, they're not all in jail now. A lot of them are still out there, still pretending to be Vietnam veterans, still pretending to have won a lot of medals that they didn't get, and so on, and making the rest of us look bad. It's called an image problem. And with you and others, if you have a question while I'm going along, please ask it, okay? I'd rather this be a group discussion than a lecture. I much prefer to respond to things that you want to know about than to sit up here and yak at you something that I might want to tell you. So feel free to ask questions as we go along. Yeah, I don't mind at all. Okay. In 1973, I believe, when the negotiations were going on in Saigon between the Americans and South Vietnamese on one side and the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese on the other side, there was an incident where an American colonel, Colonel Harry Summers, found himself out on a smoke break with a North Vietnamese colonel. And he looked at the North Vietnamese colonel and he said, you know, you never beat us in Vietnam in the field. The North Vietnamese looked at him and said, you're absolutely right, Colonel, but that's totally irrelevant. They did not beat us on the battlefield of Vietnam. They may have beat us in the Congress, on the streets of America, and other ways, but they did not beat us on the battlefield of Vietnam. General Norman Schwarzkopf has been quoted saying the same thing. The war was lost on the political side, not on the military side. Not on the military side. I spent 2 years there. I was never in a defeat. Nobody I know was ever in a defeat. There were occasional ambushes where our guys got shot up, or occasional small incidents, but not a major battle. We didn't lose a major battle. We didn't lose anything along that line.
Would you say they should have kept going? I've always been heard basically, when you go for a king, go for the throat.
Well, it depends on your mission. You have to understand the mission in Vietnam. Mission in Vietnam was not to defeat North Vietnam. We knew how to do that. I was talking about Vietnam. I just said Schwarzkopf said we did not lose in Vietnam. I wasn't talking about the Gulf War. Okay. To answer that question, though, yes, we should, but that's a different question. But in any case, at no time did we lose any major fight in Vietnam. There was an occasion in 1971 or somewhere in there, a big incident that was publicized a lot called the defeated fire base Marianne, where there were some guys who went to sleep on the perimeter and so on and allowed the VC to sneak in and they blew up the fire base. But they didn't get out, you know. There was a reaction force that came into the fire base and took care of it. But we just flat didn't, yes.
So as a matter of historical fact, then, like the battles that were going on during the Tet Offensive, that was, in fact, then a U.S. military victory.
A tremendous U.S. victory.
Although it was through the papers and some of the media, as I was pretty young then. I was about 15 then when that happened. It seemed to be just the opposite the way it was portrayed.
I'm glad you asked that question, because that's one of the biggest misunderstandings of the Vietnam War is the Tet Offensive. Tet Offensive is known as a turning point on the civilian side here in America, where the support for the war. Don't forget, when we went into the war in 1965, 85% by poll American public supported us going there. Okay, 85%. Now, what happened with Tet? Tet was a major victory for the Americans and their allies. The Viet Cong basically ceased to exist after Tet. I left there in 68 after Tet. I kept my company through Tet and gave it up after Tet, and then left in the summer of 68. I came back in 70. I was getting briefed in Saigon before I went out with the Vietnamese, and it was interesting, the intelligence reports. No Viet Cong soldiers were left. They got annihilated at Tet. Viet Cong units, yes. They were filled with North Vietnamese soldiers, though. You understand the difference in the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army? Viet Cong were the indigenous guerrillas of South Vietnam. If all the foreign forces left, it would be the VC versus the South Vietnamese Army left, okay? They were the indigenous guerrillas of South Vietnam. However, Tet eliminated the VC personnel, but that negotiation was going on in Saigon after 68, when Johnson decided he was going to try for peace, and they started the Paris peace talks and so on. One of the things they were looking at was ceasefire in place and all foreign troops leave, which meant on the South Vietnamese side, the South Vietnamese would be in place, and the Americans and Australians and all the others would leave. On the Viet Cong side, the VC units would stay in place, and all the North Vietnamese Army units would leave. So after Tet, the North Vietnamese started filtering people into the Viet Cong units, keeping the names of the Viet Cong units and the designation of the Viet Cong units on the record, although there were no more South Vietnamese people in it. So Tet eliminated the VC as a force, basically. Tet severely hurt the North Vietnamese Army, the regular army of North Vietnam. It was a major Allied victory, a major American victory, American South Vietnamese victory. The problem arose from the publicity angle and from the political angle that it occurred at all. Because for a year or so prior to Tet, the commands in South Vietnam and all were briefing the political leadership back in Washington that this is almost over, guys. We got them on the ropes, light at the end of the tunnel. You've heard that expression. They didn't say the light at the end of the tunnel was an oncoming freight train, but okay, guys, it's about over. We got them on the ropes. We can kill this thing in another year or so, something like that. And they kept saying that and kept saying that. People started believing them. Those of us in the field, well, we saw it occurring that way, and that we were beating them and we were winning and all that kind of thing. We didn't think it was about over yet. Then Tet occurred, and the fact that the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong could mount the offensive at all was the political problem. Was that created the turnaround in support among the American people. Now that's when the major demonstrations started. That's when all the mortality days and all these kind of things started. It was after Tet of 68. There was some demonstration before then, but not on a large scale. The big one started after that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
But it was a political problem of the event occurring, not the result of the event, that turned the public opinion.
If I understand right, knowledge back home that it even occurred and that there was even that progress having been made that really wasn't that well known by the general public.
Well, they kept hearing that it was almost over, that they were on the ropes, they were dying, we were killing them all, that kind of thing. And then yet they were able to do this, and across the country. Even during Tet, the only victories they really had were knocking over small district compounds and so on, which had a very small number of territorial Vietnamese forces there. And most of the Vietnamese forces at that time, the territorial forces, were totally incompetent. Later on, after '68, they learned how to do the job, but at that point, they were basically incompetent. The regular South Vietnamese Army was not bad, but it wasn't as good as it became. And once General Westmoreland left and General Abrams came in as commander of U.S. Army, U.S. Military Assistance Command, Vietnamization started. When I left in '68, the South Vietnamese Army wasn't very good. I came back in '70, it was really good.
The South Vietnamese Army is essentially outnumbered by the North, ultimately?
To an extent, yeah. Plus, the North did have the political motivation that wasn't always present in the South. To give you an example, when I left in '68, the 25th ARVN Division, which was adjacent to our U.S. 25th Division, they had an area of operation adjacent to ours, was considered the world's worst division. They, every time they went out, either they got shot up or they didn't find anything. So the morale was low, you know, they just were terrible. I came back in '70 and I was getting briefed in Saigon and said, our three best divisions are the 1st, the 9th, and the 25th. Well, I raised my hand, I said, yes, Captain. I said, you say the 25th is one of your best divisions? I left here a year ago and it was the world's worst. What happened? In 1969, they found out the division commander was a VC. So every time the division went out, he notified the VC, and they either shot him up or avoided him. They put in a real good division commander. By 1970, it was a good division.
Not sure about that. The division commander of the 25th ended up as the head of the Vietnamese infantry school.
Well, they removed him from command.
I was in the Vietnamese armor school as an advisor, and he was certainly corrupt and inept, but there was never any allegation he was a VC.
Well, that was the briefing at Saigon when I came back.
But I lived next door to him for the better part of a year.
Did he? After he gave up.
As a matter of fact, he was regularly mortared, so if he was a VC, he must have not been popular with them either.
Yeah. Well, that was the briefing at Saigon, and I never knew the guy, but that was the briefing at Saigon. I was familiar with the.
He was very close to General Tu, and General Tu used to come out to the infantry school and army school for a variety of affairs. So I think what saved him was his political connection.
Yeah, probably did. But at least the division commander changed, and the division got good after that. It really was a good division after that. Okay.
If I may. My brother was in the 2nd Battalion, 22nd Infantry of the 25th Infantry Division. Right. And I recall reading some of his letters where he made reference to rubber plantations.
Our base camp was right on the Michelin rubber plantation. It was, in fact, the plantation buildings that housed our headquarters.
And one of the things that he indicated to me in his letters and conversations afterwards, but I don't know if he ever had any proof of it, but they used to have to get permission to go into the rubber plantations, and by the time permission was granted, word got out to basically the enemy that they were coming, and essentially any element of surprise was eliminated.
The Michelin rubber plantation was always a thorn in our side. If there was any permission obtained before we went in, it was done at brigade level because we got the mission to go in. We got the mission, we went in. Now, we weren't supposed to cut the rubber tree. You know, normally we'd sit down for the night, we'd dig a foxhole, and we'd use the trees and so forth to put overhead cover. So if we got mortared that night, you know, we wouldn't get everybody killed. And we found that a 82 millimeter mortar round would stop within 2 layers of sandbags on a wood or a metal base, you know, over the foxhole. So that's how we did it. And we usually put trees or logs or something like that down, or good stout limbs, and then put sandbags on top of that. We weren't supposed to cut the rubber trees to do that. I won't say we didn't. We weren't supposed to. We figured that, you know, if we had a job to do, that what it took to do it, we did it. As far as protecting our guys and providing overhead cover and so on. That's the only thing that we ever ran into as far as permission. Now, there were probably a dozen or more rubber worker villages inside the Michelin. Every one of them was classified as a VC village. Every time we went around, most of them, certain ones were worse than others. We'd always hit mines, booby traps, we'd catch fire from the village or something like that. Almost every time we were around there. We went through the Michelin, I'd say once a month or once, in our particular company, and then other units were going through it too. So we were out there a lot. Now, I did find out in 1970 when I went back, and I didn't go visit the area, but I was talking to some guys who were there then. They'd roamed plowed about 50 yards on each side of every road through the Michelin. So whatever permission they needed to do to cut the rubber trees was OBE at that point. overcome by events. It just wasn't a problem anymore. But once we went in there, we acted just like we would anywhere else. You know, we protected ourselves. We found the enemy, we fought, and so on. And we never had to ask permission. But I don't know what brigade had to do. I do know that at Tet 68, the Michelin company, whose officials lived in Saigon, paid protection to the VC not to destroy their buildings. They could mortar our troop side of the airfield all they wanted to, but not the Michelin building side. Once Tet came along, that all went by the board too, I guess, because I found a few holes from RPGs and stuff in the Michelin building. I guess they didn't pay their taxes after that. But that's one of the reasons I don't buy Michelin stuff to this day. Okay. Any other questions about what I've done so far? Okay. Let's talk about Stone a little bit. Why did I write the book? Because the movie Platoon came out. And in the beginning of the movie Platoon, it says this is Bravo Company, 25th Infantry Division. He didn't identify it much more than that, but since Stone was in my company, I was his company commander, for all but 2 weeks of his sojourn to the 25th, it was our company. Stone said it was our company. So for that reason, I wrote the book, because the things in the movie he and I did not see when we were in that company. Now, a little bit about Stone's history in Vietnam. He came to Bravo Company in the middle of September '67. I took over the company 1st of October, so that 2 weeks before I took over is the only time he was in that company that I was as his commander. He was medevaced in January of '68, and I gave up the company after Tet at the end of February. He was medevaced because he and two other guys decided to attack this bunker, which had just almost wiped out one of my platoons. And he and these two guys attacked it head on, and they all three also got medevaced. Not real smart, but Stone was a gung-ho soldier. And as far as I know, I never had to punish him or anything else. So whatever radical attack he took after Vietnam. Now, when he was wounded, he went back, I guess, to Japan or somewhere like that to recover. When he returned, this is in his biography if you want to read it as well, he returned and was sent down to the Security Guard Battalion in Saigon. The Security Guard Battalion was made up of infantrymen who had been in the field at least 6 months and whose commanders felt they deserved a break, so they sent them down to Saigon to the Security Guard Battalion to pull guard duty in Saigon. Those guys never fought, as far as I'm aware, at all until Tet 68 came along and the war went to Saigon. And they found themselves back in the middle of it again. But he spent a month down in Saigon, and then he was sent up to the 1st Cavalry Division to finish his tour. So he finished his tour, but he did it in 2 parts, one before he was wounded, one after he was wounded. Take, for example, if you've all seen the movie, you know that 2 sergeants try to kill each other in the movie, Sergeant Elias and Sergeant Barnes. When you ask him where he got this idea, and this also is in his biography, when he was in Saigon, he met a guy that he modeled Sergeant Elias after. When he was up in the 1st Cav, he met a guy he modeled Sergeant Barnes after. And in his mind, he imagined what might happen should they ever get together. That's known as fiction, people. Fiction. So in any case, he did finish his tour in Vietnam. I found a lot of people that said they didn't even know he was in Vietnam, but he was. Finished his tour, and he was a good soldier, as far as I'm aware. I think he got a Bronze Star at some point during his tour. I don't know whether it was for valor or meritorious service, but he got a Bronze Star and did finish his tour. Now, as I said, except his first 2 weeks, the whole time he was in the 25th, which is the unit depicted in the movie, he was in my company. I was his commander. So with Bravo Company guys bugging me a lot, we couldn't kind of let it slide when he put so much negative stuff in the movie that my guys didn't do, that it kind of painted them all with a broad brush of negativism. What Stone ended up doing actually was put enough fact and truth in the movie, make people believe it. Then he made it a very anti-war movie, if you will. A lot of the things depicted in the movie weren't a problem in that time. This is 67, 68. If they became a problem later, a lot of them were not a problem at all. Some of the things that most of us object to in the movie, just to tell you that. First, let's talk about what's right with the movie. The good part about the movie, if you remember the opening scenes where the guys are moving through the jungle, they're dehydrated, they're hot, they're carrying heavy loads, and all that kind of thing. And then a little later, they're on ambush, trying to do an ambush patrol where they're fighting fatigue, and they're fighting rain, they're fighting mosquitoes, and they're doing everything else, fighting everything else, trying to stay awake and trying to stay on alert. And of course, one of the guys supposed to be on alert goes to sleep, and VC sneak up on them. Those things are extremely realistic. That's what makes you feel like you were back in Vietnam. The jungle scenes, the ambush scenes, so forth. That's extremely realistic. And most of the realism stops at that point. There were no guys trying to kill each other. My guys didn't do dope. I can tell you why I say that. If you ever been around people smoking pot, you can walk down the company street and smell it. I've been in areas since Vietnam that I could walk down the street and there'd be barracks here and barracks there, and just I could smell it coming out both directions. There was never that smell in my company area. There were no pot parties in my company area. Second reason, my guys weren't in base camp enough to get in that much trouble. For the first month and a half I had the company, we would not spend more than one night back in base camp whenever we went back, and that was only about once every 2 to 3 weeks. Now, you have to understand that the night before you go out again, you spend all night almost getting ready to go out again. You've got to clean your weapons, got to clean your equipment, got to repack your squad bags, which is a bag of extra uniforms that's sent out a week or so later, into the field, so you have some change clothes about once a week out there. You get your operations order. You got to find out what you're doing. The orders have to go all the way down to the squad, so on. So you're spending most of the night getting ready to go out. If you only got one night, you don't have time to have parties. You don't have time to. Even when we had 2 nights back, there was still no pot in the company area, no odor. I won't say nobody ever blew a joint. If they did, they went somewhere else and did it, though. It was not the massive pot parties he depicts in the movie. He tells me I probably didn't know what was going on in the company. I knew everything that went on in that company, no doubt in my mind. The other thing are the atrocity scenes. That was a very big disservice to an American soldier in Vietnam when you put that in the movie. My guys didn't do atrocities, I tell you that. First, when we captured Vietnamese, which was very rare, we didn't even do the interrogation on them. We called the Vietnamese in to do the interrogation. National Police Field Force and the Vietnamese military did the interrogations. The only time we ever found anybody in a village was when we intended to. There's a tactic called cordon and search, where you move out of your base camp or your site before daylight, you circle a village, and then when they wake up in the morning and get up, we're already there and they can't go anywhere. We did one of those the whole time I was in the company. As soon as we did the cordon and it got daylight, the National Police Field Force came in and went through the village. We didn't do that. During Tet and other times when we were around villages and so on, I can tell you that we never found anybody in the village, because as soon as the military, ours or theirs, got close, the people in the village hit the road. They were gone. They beat him out. They were left. And a lot of times we were approaching the village and we knew the VC were there because we saw the people leaving. Because one force was there and the other force was coming, and they knew there was going to be a fight. So they didn't want to be caught in the middle of it, and they left. I never found a village that wasn't abandoned unless we were doing a cordon and search. And we were in villages fighting a lot, but there were no civilians in the village. So we had no opportunity, really, to commit atrocities, even if we were inclined to do so, and I assure you we were not. We had no reason to. Let's mention My Lai for a minute. That did occur. That was an aberration. That was not something that was typical. And as far as I'm concerned, Cali and his guys are criminals and should have been put under the jail and left there for life, instead of a slap on the hand and released. Yes.
Several men were killed as a result of a battle. As a leader, as a commander of the company, what ways were you able to, for lack of a better word, settle people down so that they, I'm sure they were very angry, but how were you able to control the anger?
Are you talking about anger at the enemy soldiers?
At the enemy soldiers, yeah. Or was there...
We seldom captured enemy soldiers. Either they were killed in the fight or they left.
American soldiers having been killed and the surviving men, how were you able to control their anger?
Well, to begin with, we had a good chain of command. I had good lieutenants and good sergeants. And if there was ever a chance to get out of hand like that, they control the situation, and I was right on top of them. No platoon was ever out of my, they were out of my sight some because the jungle's pretty thick. But they were no more than a few hundred meters out of my sight. We were in constant contact by the radio. They were nowhere where I couldn't get to them real quick if I had to. So we never had that problem, and it's because we had a good chain of command. We also had good soldiers, you know. My guys could understand the difference in attacking a position or something like that, and then the attack ending, and then not going into something after that. We did capture VC occasionally, and all we did is tie them up, set them over there, and the Vietnamese come pick them up. That was what we did. We never, as far as I'm aware, did anything to a South Vietnamese soldier. I mean, a North Vietnamese soldier or VC, you know, other than we killed them when they were in the fight. And if we captured them, we turned them over to the Vietnamese. But we had a real strong chain of commands, what I'm telling you. We had real good soldiers, real good sergeants. And
if I may ask another question, reflecting on some things my brother told me, he said basically when it came to, and this is somewhat of a controversial question, I suppose, but when it came to fighting alongside the South Vietnamese Army, to paraphrase, they felt better off not having them with them than having the South Vietnamese with them to help them.
two aspects of that.
I don't know if you experienced anything similar.
Well, we never actually fought beside them. We replaced them a couple of times, and we were there at the same place they were once or twice. The problem was not so much with the regular South Vietnamese Army, it was with the territorial forces, the Regional Force Popular Force, which is called Rough Puffs, RFPFs. We just, as a planning principle, considered about 10% of the Rough Puffs were probably VC infiltrators. In fact, one of the only Vietnamese that I really learned to trust during that time, not because they were bad ones, but because I went around them a lot. So I didn't know who the good ones and the bad ones were the first tour. I found out the second tour, you know, in spades. But first tour, one of the two people I learned to trust was killed. He was a captain and a district chief. He was killed by his own guards one night, along with the executive officer, a major in the 3rd Squadron, 4th Cavalry of the 25th Infantry Division, and one of his captains. They were in a night meeting with the district chief and his elders, and two of the guards opened up on him. Huh? The Stonewall Jackson? Yeah. But so with the RFPFs, we're real reluctant to be around them a lot. I can tell you that changed after '68 some, you know, but until that point, we really didn't trust them. And we knew there were good Vietnamese and bad Vietnamese. We just didn't know which ones were which, because we were with the Americans all the time. You know, there was a problem with being an American unit, as you never associated very much with the Vietnamese. One other point, and I've answered your first question. With the South Vietnamese Army, we didn't normally have that problem. I won't say they weren't infiltrators, but they were a lot more professional than the RFPFs were. And after Vietnamization started, they got more professional to the point that in 1973 they withstood a massive attack across the border by the North Vietnamese Army. So we never actually fought side by side with the Vietnamese Army. Now during Tet, on first day of Tet, we deployed around Cu Chi City to defend against 2 companies of NVA that were supposed to be heading that way, and an RF platoon tied them up about 8 kilometers south of where we were. And we ended up having to go down to where they were fighting, and as we came in, the Vietnamese platoon left. But they'd done their job, so now it was our turn. So we really weren't fighting by them, we replaced them at that point. And about the 4th day of Tet, I was down at Cu Chi District one night with my company. I moved down there after dark, and the VC came after the district advisor and the district chief, and they didn't know we were there. And his RF company, which was guarding the province, the district compound, were laying down in their bunkers while my guys were shooting. But again, I would call it fighting side by side. Now that, like I said, a lot of that changed after '68, but during Tet, that's the way it was a lot.
That was, I guess, an obvious answer. At the brigade level, as far as planning different operations, it sounds like the United States Army and forces were somewhat independent of what the South Vietnamese Army was doing. They must have coordinated so they wouldn't bump into each other.
Well, there's coordination at division level because we had areas of operation. We had our area of operation. 25th, the Vietnamese 25th had their area of operation. The first Division had theirs, and so on. We just operated within our area unless for some reason we were tasked to go elsewhere. During November '67, there was a battle up in a place called Loc Ninh, right on the Cambodian border, which is in the 1st Division's area. We left our AO, 2 of our battalions, ours and 2nd the 12th, and went to the 1st Division to assist them in the Battle of Loc Ninh. But generally, we stayed in our area. Our area included the Michelin rubber plantation and areas to the north, the east, or the west and the south of it. To the east of it was 1st Division area. So we never went east of the Michelin rubber. But that kept us from really running into each other. And then, of course, within the division, brigades had their areas, and battalions had their areas, and, you know, sometimes the company would get an area of our own to operate in, too. But they really didn't have a problem running into people because of that. Now, where we did have a problem sometimes is when people of perhaps other countries, like the Australians, would go out into an area. They didn't have their own area of operation particularly. Yes?
Actually, I operated with the Australians.
Did you?
And, yeah. I was a Vietnamese CAV advisor. And they were back down towards the South China Sea, and they had an AO.
Yeah.
And when we would operate down there, we had to coordinate with the Australians, who were the largest men I had ever seen. By and large, you had to be 6'6" to be in the Australians.
You ever see how much beer they drink?
They were very large, and they were reasonable. They had they were the only crew I ever saw that ran tank ambushes at night. But we would coordinate with them, and they had an AO, and I operated in and out of it fairly regularly.
Well, they occasionally were up in our area. That's why
They had a mixed in a New Zealand artillery group and a
Yeah.
Australian armor and infantry group, and some air support.
There was also an occasion during Tet, I believe, when we were operating up in War Zone C next to the Cambodian border, where we thought the Australians were up there, but, you know, and this is a fairly famous incident. I've seen it at Benning and Leavenworth and a couple other places, but one of our battalions, not our battalion, one of our battalions was operating up near Cambodia, and they were calling artillery in a certain area, and they got this call, it was obviously an Australian accent, saying, you know, hold up the artillery, you're killing us, you're hurting us, and all like this. Later, they found out there was no Australians in the area. So they think someone on the VC North Vietnamese side were imitating Australians on our net to stop us from throwing the artillery on them. I went down to Saigon once and was in Brink's BOQ, I guess, where the Australians were staying there. And a guy invited me in for a beer. He had a big upright refrigerator, and he opened the door, and all the shelves were gone, and beer was stacked from the bottom to the top in there. And the only difference in the beers, there's a blue one, a green one, a yellow one, and a red one. So which one you want? The blue one, okay. I don't know what brand it was or otherwise, but those guys were good. Huh? It was Australian beer. Just like we had Budweiser. Well, we didn't have it. The division headquarters had it. We had Ballantine.
Black label.
Yeah. Actually, Black Label was high-test stuff at that point. Let me touch a little bit about why I thought we should write the book. And I touched this a little bit in the introduction to the book. When most of the guys came back from Vietnam, most of them went home, resumed their former life as best they could, jobs, so on, and didn't talk much about Vietnam. A lot of them didn't. A lot of them just said, I don't want to talk about it. So the only thing you heard publicly was the other side. The only thing you heard was the shrill anti-war movement, folks there who created, in effect, much of the negative image of the Vietnam veteran. The fact that the American soldier, on the whole, didn't talk about Vietnam allowed the other side to create that negative image, and that's where a lot of it came from. A lot of it today, a lot of the people today who are very big in the PTSD arena, the Agent Orange arena and all like that, are from the anti-war movement back in the 60s and 70s. I won't name names, but if you want to know who they are, read Stolen Valor. We thought that we should write the book for 2 reasons. I had two basic goals, and I had 3 target audiences. First goal was to set the record straight about Bravo County. Because what Stone, like I said, what Stone did is he put enough truth in the movie to make you believe it, And then he put everything negative he could come up with that was ever said about Vietnam in the movie, which my guys just flat didn't do. Secondly is to try to improve the image of the Vietnam veteran as a whole. Yes?
What do you think Oliver's motivation was to put all these negative things in his movie?
You never talked to
All he
Oliver.
knows they didn't happen.
Oliver is very anti-war. He obviously was making an anti-war. He had a political agenda, no doubt, when he made the movie. He says it's an allegory for all of Vietnam, but again, that's a slap in the face of the veteran, because those things in there that I talked about a while ago are not normal to the veteran of Vietnam. It's not the things we normally did. There was always isolated incidents occasionally which you could point at, like My Lai. But every war has had some degree of atrocity. You know, we had My Lai. But it was not a typical situation or a typical thing that occurred. In the movie, it looks like it is.
You think My Lai was very rare?
I think it was an aberration. I think it was, extremely rare. And like I said, in my opinion, the guys that did it are criminals. They should have been treated as criminals. I was at Benning when Callie was waiting trial. He was in house arrest at the BOQ next to mine with his girlfriend visiting him every night. Doesn't sound like a criminal to me, does it to you? And then what they did is they gave him a sentence and gave him credit for time served and released him. He's now working in a hardware store back home somewhere, I think, something like that. But in an effort to try to help change the image of the veteran, what the book shows you is a unit which is doing its job very effectively, which it did, showing you guys who are dedicated to their mission, who brave. They're not, they don't go AWOL. They don't shirk their duty. They do their duty and do it well. And they don't do dope, and they don't commit atrocities because they didn't do that. And I tell people, if you see something in the movie and it's not in the book, the reason is it didn't happen. That's why it's not in the book. I had one guy that asked me, he said, well, that's a pretty good book, but you didn't address the drug problem. I said, it wasn't a drug problem. I have nothing to address. Even when drugs became somewhat of a problem, that didn't occur until after 1970 when the drawdown started. In my opinion, we created the problem by the way we did the drawdown, but hindsight's 20/20. You had these units leaving and the guys left back didn't want to be the last guy killed in Vietnam, and the morale went down, and they turned to things like, a lot of them turned to things like drugs. But that was a late thing in the war. It was not something that occurred all the time, certainly not in 67, 68, which is the time frame of the book, the movie, and our service there. Yes?
Do you think, during the later stages of the war, when, things got more loose, soldiers started to smoke more pot, and they had more of a laid-back attitude, would you attribute that to poor leadership and poor discipline?
The problem is the latter part of the war, and like I said, I think it's created by the way we drew down forces. We kept everybody there to a certain point, called the end of the war, and everybody went home at the same time. I don't think we had any of those problems. But with the guys left back, military discipline did suffer. And when anything like that happens, it's obviously a breakdown in discipline. But again, that's really only after 1970, 71, that time frame, that it became much of a problem. It wasn't a problem before, just flat wasn't a problem before that. But yeah, I think it probably was a breakdown in discipline in the end. And I'm not the only one that says that. There's some of the generals that were there say that. If you read On Strategy by Harry Summers, you'll see the same theme. Plus, On Strategy is more at a national or theater level point of view, but that's part of it. On Strategy basically addresses the strategic errors we made in Vietnam. It has nothing to do with the ability of the American fighting man. It has to do with the leadership in Washington and the country. So, you agree?
I was there in the 70s as an advisor. The biggest drug problem I saw was alcohol, which is the standard. To the extent the militaries have a problem, it's with alcohol.
I agree with that. But then, when the guy's out under the gun for 3 weeks, constantly, he gets one night back. I had no problem if he had a few beers, but I had a few
The
beers.
only drug problems I saw were, I was an advisor, and we happened to have a group of MPs with us, American MPs. I was there when the Saigon was being shelled regularly, and we had some rocket suppression missions, so we had some MPs. And to the extent that the MPs weren't busy, they would every once in a while have that famous aroma that you spoke of.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying that nobody smoked dope.
Trick
I'm
was
saying
to
there's combat
keep
troops
the
in
kids
stuff.
busy.
Yeah.
And by and large, American soldiers aren't stupid, and when they knew there was a good chance they're going to be shot at, they wanted to be reasonably sober to deal with the problem. And when they thought there was a chance that they wouldn't be shot at and that no one would figure out what the hell they were doing, they would get up to into mischief, like most 18 and 19-year-old kids do.
Yeah.
So you keep them busy and keep them in the field.
Now, I'm not saying that nobody smoked dope. I'm saying the combat troops didn't smoke dope. There was an occasional incident where the DISCOM guys, the Division Support Command guys, stayed in base camp all the time, never went out, were busted by CID for occasional party or something like that. But the movie doesn't show that. The movie shows the combat guys coming back and having dope. My intent was when my guys came in out of the field that they got a break, they got a beer, they got ready to go back out, you know, and that was the routine. If they had an extra day in, then I'd give them a night to get drunk if they wanted to, you know, because it relieves the pressure. But again, there was no odor of pot. But we had our own club. The way the club system set up in the battalion is there was an officers club, an NCO club, and each company had an EM club. And when we came back, after my first time back, I made sure my first sergeant had steaks and chicken and stuff like that. We had a grill. When the company was coming back in, they put all this stuff on. Troops came in, they had steak, they had chicken, they had cold beer in the refrigerator in the club. And, you know, they were allowed to chow down, have a beer or two, and then they had to get ready, start getting the stuff together and cleaned up. But, you know, that was morale. And their morale was very high, I thought. Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious as to whether or not your book has generated any kind of a response from Oliver Stone.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard from him?
Let's talk about correspondence with Oliver Stone. In fact, I brought a couple of things here. I'll tell you a little bit of the history of that as well. In 1996, I finished the draft, which I've been working on off and on for about 5 years. And when I finished it, I sent a copy of the draft to about, 20 or so former Bravo Company guys that I knew where were when I was Oliver. To a man except for Oliver, all the response I got back was, hey, it's great, let's get this thing published. And as one of my guys said, they want this version of our story to be as popular or as well known as the Platoon version, because this is the true story. Stone came back and said, well, and I'd ask him, you know, when I sent him the copy if he'd be willing to write a foreword to it or something like that. Stone comes back and says, well, I looked at it, and it's interesting to me as one who participated, but you have no plot development, you have no character development, stuff like that. It means he's thinking fiction. This is not fiction. This is nonfiction. This is a narrative. It doesn't have plot and character development. It's not part of the deal. But if you ever get a publisher, I don't think you will, but if you ever get a publisher, I'll think about writing something. Okay. So for about 2 years, I kind of procrastinated a little bit. I knew some guys like Joe Galloway and some of the others who published books, and even during that time, Stone's biography came out, written by a guy named Jim Reardon up in the Midwest, and he gave it to his agent, a couple of people like that, but he was changing agents at the time, so that kind of screwed that up. But I tried networking because I didn't want to get rejected, right? You know, new author never wants to be rejected, and I certainly didn't want to be rejected. So I was trying to network to do it, and after about January of last year, I said, well, I guess if I'm ever going to get this thing published, I'm going to have to do it myself. So I sent out 53 query letters. I got 8 requests for manuscripts and 4 offers. So that's not bad. And so when I had found a publisher and signed a contract and all, I called Oliver. I said, okay, Oliver, you told me 2 years ago that if I found a publisher, you might write something for me. I said, well, I found a publisher. Are you going to write something? He said, yeah, I can probably write something, but you need to send me another copy of it because I don't know where the other one was. Personal opinions, I probably never read it anyway, but you know. So I sent him another copy. Now the difference in 96 and 98 is I wrote the introduction. In the introduction, I say 2 things that he took a section to, but 2 things is Platoon may be Oliver's story, but it sure as heck ain't Bravo Company's story. This book is Bravo Company's story because a lot of the stuff he put in there, Bravo Company didn't do. I also said, I never said the war was right or wrong. I never tried to defend the war, no more I've tried to defend getting into World War II or Korea or anything else. Just a minute and I'll get your question. But I said, it happened, tell your story, make the best of it. You know, let's try to change the image of the veteran from this negative thing the anti-war groups are trying to push to what we really did. I never said it was right or wrong. I just said make the best of it. So Oliver's response to that was, and I said the only difference in 96 and 98 was this introduction. So I'm afraid I'm not in agreement with your forward. Your contention that the war was somehow right bothers me deeply. Now, did I say the war was right? No. I just said it happened. Let's make the best of it. Nor can I endorse your negative portrayal of my perception of the war. Sure, I have a negative portrayal of his perception of the war. I have a negative opinion of his perception of the war. So I'm sorry, you were a captain at a remove from where I saw it as a specialist for 11 Bravo. 11 Bravo is a rifleman, MOS. Sincerely, Oliver Stone. I don't want to read you my whole answer because it's a whole page. But this is my answer. Dear Oliver, I received your fax of 8 April. I'm sorry you feel the way you do, although your reaction was not unanticipated. As we have discussed on several previous occasions, there was much in your portrayal of Bravo Company and Platoon that bothered me deeply, as it did other company members. Now, going a little bit about, I don't agree that I was too far away. You know, I knew everything, basically everything that went on in the battalion, which I believe I did. I mean, not in the battalion, in the company. And also say that maybe some of these things you picked up in the other units. However, you portrayed them in the movie as being in Bravo Company. We take exception to that. I'll say also my portrayal of Bravo's story has been enthusiastically endorsed and encouraged by more than a dozen of Bravo's members of that period, most of whom were enlisted 11 Bravos, as well as former enlisted soldiers of other nearby units such as the 2nd of the 22nd Mech. I stand by my portrayal. And I go about concerning the rightness of the war. I never said it was right. I just said, you know, make the best of it. I said, whether it's right or wrong, I will never denigrate the efforts and sacrifices of American soldiers who served under me or with me. As far as I'm concerned, the vast majority of soldiers served honorably and did the job given them to do, however ill-conceived that job may or may not have been. And then at the end, I end it with enough said. I hope we can be friendly and agree to disagree. You obviously have your opinion, and I have mine. We're both entitled to that. Yours has been heard ad infinitum. Now it's my turn. And his response to that, and I'll quit after this because this is the last response I have. I'll quit with this. Dear Bob, by all means, please feel free to disagree with my film. I bear you no anger or malice. All our experiences reflect the eyes through which we see our worlds. I've been an interpretive artist for many years now. I shape these stories the way I think they work for me. It's fiction, right? As a dramatist, which I have never claimed to be otherwise, I do not present myself, Bob, as a documentarian as I think you do. See, that must mean he thinks that I've documented what the company did, doesn't it? I condense events, shift dates and units, but try to tell it in a way that I think captures its true meaning. Many have agreed or not. There were many removed for us, the veterans. I wish you success with your book, told from a working captain's point of view. He's still got to throw that captain's point of view in there, doesn't he? I regret I cannot join in the spirit of your book, but good luck anyway. We all need some along the way. Oliver Stone. That's the correspondence with Oliver. I haven't heard talk to him since then, but this occurred in April, May time frame, so it wasn't long ago. Let me before I do a closing, how much time we've got? Pretty good? Pretty close? Are there any other questions? You have one a while ago? We got behind you, yeah.
Looking back on it, do you think the Vietnam was worth it, you know, given the enormous expense and 60,000 men killed? Or do you think we just should have stayed out?
Well, to answer that question, first you have to consider why we were there and then what happened at the end. We went there under a treaty obligation and under CETA. We were both signatories, South Vietnam and the United States, signatories of CETA treaty, similar to the NATO treaty, I guess, but it's Southeast Asia. And there was some evidence that they were being invaded by North Vietnamese. North Vietnamese units were coming out of the north into the south and contesting the South Vietnamese. Now, our objective for going there, like I said earlier, was never to defeat North Vietnam. You know, we're the most powerful country in the world. If we wanted to defeat a little country like North Vietnam, we'd have done it in a week, not a week, in 6 months maybe. But what we'd have done instead of landing a Marine battalion at Da Nang where the girls met them and put lasers around their necks, we'd have jumped an airborne division on the Hanoi, landed 2 amphibious divisions at Haiphong and met in the middle and been over. I mean, we knew how to do that. We just fought World War II 10 years before that, 20 years before that. So if that was our objective, we could have done it. There's no problem with that. Because that wasn't our objective. Although now General Westmoreland wanted to make it an American land war. At one point he asked for 2.5 million men. He only got 500,000. But he asked for 2.5 million. Our mission was to go to provide security while the South Vietnamese Army developed. But General Westmoreland really didn't want to do that, and it really didn't start, we didn't start helping the South Vietnamese Army develop until 68 when General Abrams came in. And Vietnamization started, in effect. And it progressed very well. Like I said, by 73, all our forces were out. North Vietnamese came across en masse across the border into Quang Tri Province, kicked the 3rd ARVN Division all the way back to Da Nang. But at Da Nang, there was a line of the 1st ARVN, Brigade of Airborne, Brigade of Marines. And they stopped them and kicked the North Vietnamese back into North Vietnam. That's pretty good. And the other major offensive came through Loc Ninh, down in the 3 Corps area, across the Cambodian border, down the Ho Chi Minh Trail and across the Cambodian border. And they took Loc Ninh again. You know, I said we were there in, in 67, but they came back again in 73 and came down to An Loc, south of there, down not too far from 1st Division to old base camp and all. 5th ARVN got on line there and stopped them at An Loc. They destroyed An Loc doing it, but they stopped them. And they pushed them back. They didn't quite push them all the way past Loc Ninh back into Cambodia, but they stopped them and blunted their attack and pushed them back. That was pretty good action. And that's how much the South Vietnamese Army had improved since 68. Now, what happened in 75? The major event that occurred between 73 and 75 is the United States Congress cut off all aid to South Vietnam. Cut off their bullets, cut off their gas, cut off all their aid. And the problem was that you also undermined the morale of the South Vietnamese Army. Because in the past, before that occurred, there's always a possibility if they were being overrun, the American Army would come back in and help them. But they knew at that point, the American Army wasn't coming anywhere. They were on their own, with their own resources. And therefore, when the offensive started in 75, they basically collapsed. Now, I won't say all of them collapsed. The ring around Saigon was never broken. There were 3 ARVN divisions, I believe, around Saigon. I know my old division, the 9th, was there, the 5th, and I think the 1st. There's also Marine units and airborne units around there. And that ring was never penetrated. So that North Vietnamese ricocheted off that ring several times and never penetrated it. But what happened was the government surrendered. The government capitulated to the North. 2 left General Minh in charge, and the presumption was they left men in charge to surrender. And they surrendered. And of course, then the soldiers around the capital had to surrender too because the country just surrendered. Does that answer your question?
You could actually won the war. You know, given that the North Vietnamese were always up there, they were always well organized.
I think we could do anything we wanted to. Now, the problem is after 1970 or 71, when the fighting spirit went down because of the drawdown and so on for those left back, what capability we could have exercised with our forces we still had in country is probably limited. But we still had a lot of them elsewhere. If we really wanted to go, we could have brought them in from the States, from Hawaii, from Panama, from other places, and took it home to them. But that was never our mission. It was never our mission. What does win the war mean? Does it mean to physically defeat North Vietnam? That was never our mission to do that.
You think that, if we had kept supporting the South Vietnamese, and their army kept in good shape, and they were a good fighting force, do you think the North Vietnamese would have eventually backed off and come to a settlement?
I think it would depend. I think the South Vietnamese Army would have continued to fight had we kept supporting them, because they showed in 73 that they had improved an awful lot. Whether they could have eventually held out forever against North Vietnamese, I don't know. I really don't. It depends on how the battles would have gone. Had they been able to attrit the North enough so that they weakened the forces, they probably could have eventually won. They did have, they were organized fairly similar to the way we were. They had a lot of artillery. They had air, so on. North Vietnamese had artillery. They never brought it south until later. They never brought the air south. They brought a few tanks south with the invasion. But South Vietnamese Army had all those forces, all those too, in spades. So I think they would have continued to fight. They possibly could have won the 75 invasion. Well, they won the 78 invasion, the 80 invasion, and so on and not. You know, I don't think anybody can say that. I don't know. I do know that they would have probably continued fighting at least in 75 when the invasion did occur, had we not dumped them. Okay.
Towards the end of Platoon, there's a fire support base. It appears to be, you know, with a perimeter of foxholes, and then in the middle is a portrayal of like a captain's command center. Was that supposed to be a depiction in some way of like fire support base Burt?
Absolutely. You know what the factual differences were in the movie and the real fire base? This is the finale of the movie. If you notice in the movie, it looked like only one on the perimeter was Bravo Company. Battalion CP was in the perimeter. During the fight, the perimeter got penetrated and basically the fire base was overrun. It says fire base, but I didn't see any artillery tubes in it. It got overrun. The battalion CP got blown up. Bravo 6 took command, called in an airstrike on his own position. That's the way it ended. And then when it was over, it looked like Charlie Sheen and a couple other guys survived, and a mech unit came from somewhere far away and discovered the survivors, right? Firebase Burt had 2 battalions in the perimeter. The mech was on one side, we were on the other side. There were 4 batteries of artillery in that perimeter, one 155 battery and 3 105 batteries. You didn't see that in the movie. The perimeter was never overrun. It was penetrated in 2 places, Alpha Company's area and Charlie Company's area. I had 2 platoons. I had 1 platoon on the perimeter, 1 out on ambush, and 2 in reserve. I had the reaction force, the reserve force, and 2 of my platoons. When Alpha Company was penetrated, we counterattacked and restored the perimeter, and the perimeter stayed whole all night in Alpha Company's area. Charlie Company collapsed, but on the perimeter, not back into the fire base past the first tube. The recon platoon counterattacked and restored Charlie Company's perimeter, and the perimeter was intact the rest of the night. So the battalion CP was never in danger. I certainly never took command, and I certainly never called an airstrike inside the perimeter. Now, Stone was in the 2nd platoon, which is part of the counterattack force. Once we got up on the perimeter, we did have airstrikes coming in outside the perimeter reasonably close. I'd say within 175 to 100 meters with NAPE, which I used to bring in to 50 meters sometimes. And it's possible, and NAPE is what they showed in the movie. It's possible that he thought one of those airstrikes was inside the perimeter when he may have gotten misoriented, and when it was actually outside, he thought it was inside. Because when I talked to him in 87, when I found out the movie was us, we went over a couple of those things. He said, well, we heard the battalion CP was in danger. It's never in danger, no problem. Huh? I'm sorry? Well, yeah, when I found out it was us. I just sloughed it over as another left-wing anti-war movie until I found that out. Now I got personally involved, personally affront, you know. But, and he said, well, we thought you called an airstrike into the perimeter. I never called an airstrike into the perimeter. You know, it didn't happen. Things didn't happen. But that was supposed to be Burt. That's his impression of Burt. Any other questions before I close? Yes.
Comments about the negative image that many Americans have. Like myself, being a younger person, I kind of was a teenage, maybe 12 years old by the time we got out of Southeast Asia. But how are we supposed to look at movies like, other movies like, you know, Born on the 4th of July or Apocalypse Now or your Deer Hunter or stuff like that, where, I mean, you look at that and you just shudder to think, man, how did these guys survive, or why were we over there? We're just one big, you know, madhouse over there. I mean, how, you know, what should we make of all that? Or
every movie you mentioned is anti-war propaganda. But now, Kovic, his book and his movie, I don't think ever mentions his second tour. He still portrays himself as a naive young guy swept up with this nasty machine. But he was part of the machine for 2 1/2. He was a gung-ho. He was up there killing VC, you know, in battles and so on for 2 1/2 before he got wounded. And then suddenly it became wrong. Deer Hunter did nothing more than promote the idea of the Vietnam veteran as a victim. And to me, the Vietnam veteran's not a victim. You know, he did his job. He did it honorably as a whole, as a rule. He went home and went back to his life. Every movie you mentioned is in the 1 category, not the 10 category. There's nothing really realistic about any of them, except Platoon. As I said, I told you the parts of Platoon that I thought was very realistic. Now, Full Metal Jacket. Let's look at that one. First half Full Metal Jacket is in boot camp, and the guy playing the drill sergeant in the movie used to be a drill sergeant. So, not being a Marine, I presume that it was fairly accurate, because I can't imagine a guy, a competent NCO being up there portraying what he did in real life in a kind of a less manner than what he actually did. Maybe not quite all the hazing, but I presume that half is pretty accurate. The last half of the movie, they're fighting street to street and way. I was not in way. I don't know how fighting street to street and way is. That was the only street battles we had in the whole war. The traditional urban warfare. And I wasn't there, so I really can't address that too much. But
Just one comment, dude.
okay.
You take a look at the literature of warfare. I'm trying to think of a single novel that has made any difference, particularly in our culture, that wasn't essentially anti-war. For those of you that read The Best Out of World War II, The Naked and the Dead, no one gets a sense that war was a picnic in that.
Mm-hmm.
If you take a look at the World War I literature, no one has ever suggested that that All Quiet, which was a part of a trilogy, which dealt with the war and its aftermath, no one has suggested that Goodbye to All That is anything but anti-war. All of Sigrid Sassoon's poems, Wilfred Owen's poems. I'm not sure you can go through a war as an armored, or in your case, an infantry officer, and then sit down to write and not have at least a sense of sorrow.
I agree with you.
And some have expressed their sorrow in certain ways, and others but I think that it would be too much to expect, given Vietnam, and given the history of that war, and the history of and the way in which we have recorded war in our culture, to have expected serious pieces of work. And I, regardless of whether I agree with them or not, I think Deer Hunter was an attempt to be serious. I think that the Platoon was an attempt to be serious. There haven't been any great novels about Vietnam, particularly. I would put Kovic's work as a novel. Full Metal Jacket's not particularly good. We could go through some of it, but it's not particularly good. But I think that the literature that is remembered about war has essentially the same point, and that is, it is at best a sorrowful enterprise in which some of the finest young men we've ever met, because they were our brothers, end up either dead physically or sometimes emotionally, and that when we get back, we have a hell of a time figuring out what all this meant. Mm-hmm. It's not a question we use drugs or alcohol or become homeless, but I know that I spent a period, I went to graduate school. I went to a graduate school in Washington, which had huge anti-war riots before I got there. We talk about going to whole defilade for a period of time.
I went to Hopkins after that.
And there is a period of time that you have to get used to it, and I think that it would not be reasonable to expect that the way in which this war, like others, are going to be portrayed is anything but essentially an anti-war position.
War by nature is not a pleasant experience. There's certain good things that come out of war, like camaraderie, like the feeling of accomplished a job or a mission that you were given to do that was hard or whatever. Those are the good things that come out of war. Losing your friends, losing your buddies, getting guys shot up, stuff like that is the other side of the coin. And in the book, although I do show the unit as doing its job, basically, doing it in an admirable manner and stuff like that, we still lose guys. You still feel bad when guys are lost. When you can't.
We lost guys, by the way, we lost guys trying to avoid civilian casualties.
Yeah.
I mean, my unit was not necessarily unusual, but we deliberately avoided things which might have been militarily more efficient to ensure that, to minimize the opportunity for civilians to get themselves in the way.
It was always tempting to, when our base camp got mortar from some of those VC villages in the Michelin, to annihilate the village. But the VC mortarman was not the only guy in the village, and we didn't do that. You're right that there's things we could have done that we didn't do in an effort to save civilian lives. I don't know if I ever lost anybody trying to do that, unless more boarders coming in and hurting people, would have been stopped if we had. And like I said, when we were out out on operation, we very seldom found people in villages, so that wasn't a problem. But there were things, even over there that we didn't do that we could have done that would have caused civilian casualties. Okay, let me close this with a couple of points. When I took over Bravo Company, it was the worst company in the battalion. 1 month later, I was told the battalion operations officer that Bravo was the best company. Now, it wasn't because of my great leadership ability, but what I did to begin with is I set the sergeants and the lieutenants down. When I went out in the field and took over, I took over when the guy before me got wounded. I set the sergeants down, set the lieutenants down. I said, you guys wearing stripes, I expect you to go act like it. You guys wearing bars, I expect you to go act like it. I'm not going to do your job for you. I expect you to do your job. The guy before me, the reason the company had such a reputation is the company commander tried to do everything. Like one chief and a bunch of Indians, period. You know, he tried to do it all. And he wasn't capable of doing it all. You know, he'd probably been fairly successful had he used his subordinate leaders, but he didn't. And all I did is I got them activated. And they did the job. There's not anything I particularly did except give them the freedom to perform. And so I had extremely good sergeants. I had extremely good lieutenants. Every lieutenant I had, by the way, came straight out of OCS. I did not have a single West Point or ROTC lieutenant in my 5 months in command. Where did they go? I don't know. Germany, 82nd Airborne Division, somebody like that. But they didn't come to me in Vietnam. They may have come to some of the other units, but they didn't come to me. So every lieutenant I had was fresh out of OCS. First thing I did when I got him is I called the platoon sergeant over and said, this is your lieutenant. Lieutenant, this is your boss. And when he tells me that you're ready, then you'll be the boss. Usually a couple weeks later, sergeant come back, I think lieutenant's ready. Okay, lieutenant, now it's your platoon. But that kept guys from getting killed because of some guy that was new and fresh and didn't know what he was doing. But I had good lieutenants and I had good NCOs. And when I let them perform and do their job, the company improved tremendously across the board. The other thing is you need to have a successful company, good soldiers. Bravo Company had great soldiers. You got to have soldiers who respond to military discipline. You got to have soldiers who take a sense of responsibility for their actions. You got to have soldiers, you know, who care about getting the job done, care about their fellow soldiers. And these guys did. I would put Bravo's guys up against anybody in any war, anywhere. They were competent, they were cared about the job, cared about their fellow soldiers, and they got the job done. They also had to contribute, you know, they had to be successful, they had to contribute to the teamwork and cohesion of the unit. They did that. Last July, Bravo Company had a reunion in California, which I went to. First national reunion we've had. They had a couple little small ones. We had over 80 guys show up. Not all of them when I was there, but they were in Bravo Company. We figured there were probably 1,200 people that served in Bravo Company in Vietnam in the 5 years they were there. We've got a little organization which is set up and founded by my old radio operator, a guy named John Ott, called Bravo Regulars. Our battalion motto was Regulars by God, which came out of the Mexican War, I guess, or something, the War of 1812, one of them. But so Bravo Regulars is Bravo Company's organization. And for 1,200 people being in the company, including those that died, we're over 500 of them in that organization right now, which is tremendous. And we had 80 of them show up at that reunion in California. And they came with their wives, their kids, their girlfriends, if that was appropriate, and so on. And those guys as normal as you are, anybody else is. And they've always been that way since they came back. These are the guys that are the epitome of the Vietnam veteran. Not these raggedy people you see show up at all the Memorial Day and Veterans Day events saying, gee, man, it was tough in Nam. If you read Stolen Valor, you'll see that a lot of those people have been proven. People who make the national media as the typical Vietnam vet weren't even in Vietnam, or in many cases weren't even in the military. My guys are like most Vietnam veterans. They're good, productive members of their community. I'm sorry? Yeah. Well, Rambo is one of the biggest disservices to the Vietnam veteran too. You know, again, we have the Vietnam victim. So, okay, I'm through. Unless you have more questions. Any more questions? Yes. Thank you.
If you thought that maybe a lot of the impetus behind the anti-war sentiment had a lot to do with, like you said, all of the death. It's not necessarily who's killing who, it's just people were dying, you know. It's, in all wars, I mean, I'm not so naive to think that people don't die, but I think that's where a lot of the anti-war sentiment comes from. It's just that our sons, brothers, daughters, and I think it comes out like, why is this going on? People are dying, they're coming home. it's nice there for the cause, but death is never a pleasant thing.
War is dying. That's part of it. My job is to kill that other guy before he kills me. And he's going to try as hard as I'm trying. That's what war is all about. And we, you know, the same situation in World War II. It's supposed to be the big good war, right? There were more people opposed World War II than opposed Vietnam in the early part of Vietnam. There was a survey taken 2 years after World War II ended, where 25% of Americans surveyed felt that we made a mistake going into World War II, getting into the war at all. So, and like I said, after the war, in retrospect, that we made a mistake being in the war. 25% of the survey. And don't forget, I said a while ago, as we were going into Vietnam, 85% of the American people by survey supported us doing it. But, you know, a lot of people and a lot of anti-war activists back then admit today that said, you know, I didn't want to go get killed. I didn't want to go get hurt. I was afraid to go. So that's why we protested against it. Now, let me tell you one other thing, though. If you really want to know, as far as, you know, in my personal opinion, how things were in Vietnam and after Vietnam, I recommend 2 books to you. Mine, which is a good example of a unit who did its job and came home, and one called Stolen Valor by B.G. Burkett, where he gets into the fakes, the wannabes, you know, all that kind of thing. And it's really an eye-opener when you read it. And it's all based on studies and surveys and so on. And military records.
Real quick, I didn't talk about it in your book, but I noticed on your shirt it says Bravo Bull.
Chapter 2.
Yeah. Should we read about it and find out what that means?
That was my nickname in Vietnam. It was the title of my book till my publisher decided it was a better way to tie it to the movie Platoon. I totaled 3 Jeeps in 5 minutes one night during a mortar attack. Brigade commanders, the artillery battalion commanders, and mine. And one of my fellow company commanders, after it was over, said, "Oh, you're kind of like a bull in a china shop, aren't you?" So that became my nickname. And the guys today call me that, too. So that's where it came from. I'm sorry?
Do you ever do documentaries?
Do I ever do documentaries?
Yeah. Like a true documentary, like when you're over and show something like on a History Channel type documentary.
You mean, did I participate in any of them? No. Not that I'm aware of. You know, you had cameramen out filming stuff. Well, after Tet, at the end of Tet, we'd spent most of Tet fighting in this one village called Ap Cho, where they put our foot mobile shirt armored battalion against a dug-in NBA battalion and expected us to take them. You know, where they had they were dug in with no man's land around it, and we took a week and a half. We tried to do that, and we never could. They finally gave us 2 mechanized infantry companies, 1 Army cavalry squadron with 5 tanks, 2 Zippos, that's M113 Army personnel carriers, flamethrowers, and an 8-inch howitzer, which is a pretty good sized tube. And we fired 8-inchers at 750 meters minimum range, directing it right in the mouths of the bunkers. I used to call it our 8-inch spotter rifle. And it took 2 days for all that to go through there. But at the end, the last day, I happened to be the reserve company, which was a break. And when we finally took the village, my job was to take the bulldozers in and dig up all the fortifications, level them, and then Graves registration pick up all our guys. And a camera crew showed up. Did they film us that day? I don't know. But they showed up. Yeah. You never know. Documentaries are people that go out and take pictures and do filming about what they see without regard to who's in it. Yeah. If you guys would like a book, I'll go ahead and set up here and sign them, and then you can take care of paying for them. Our nice hostess back there, Mary. Okay? Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Get up my trusty rusty signing pen here.
I already have one. So
Huh?
get it signed.
Okay. Today is the 20th?
20th of January.
They run together after a while. Experience, I won't go to my other 23 years or whatever it was. Most of them spent in Germany, but that is my Vietnam experience. My decorations from that time in Vietnam is I hold the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, 4 Bronze Stars, 2 for Valor, an Air Medal, a Purple Heart, an Army Commendation Medal for Valor, plus a lot of meritorious service awards for the rest of the career. So that's where I'm coming from when I talk. Now, I stand before you tonight a total failure. After 2 tours in Vietnam, I'm a veteran of 2 tours in Vietnam, 2 full tours. I retired lieutenant colonel, but I was a captain when I was in Vietnam, both tours. I am shaved. My hair is fairly short. I'm not wearing any parts of old Army uniforms. I do not suffer from any kind of post-Vietnam syndrome. I use that term instead of PTSD because it's a lot more encompassing than PTSD is. I have not suffered any effects of Agent Orange or even in my backyard Roundup or anything like that or anything else someone can come up with. I'm not homeless. I'm not suicidal by any nature. I've had a fairly good marriage for the last 20 years. That means I haven't beat the wife, the dogs, the cats, or the horses. I won't talk about them beating me, but you know, that's different. I'm not an alcoholic, although I occasionally like a beer, a glass of wine, a wee dram of single malt, something like that. But I know when to take it and when to leave it. I've had a rather productive career in the military, and since then, until I became a writer. That we'll see how productive that becomes. In Vietnam, I didn't kill any innocent civilians, women, kids, anything like that. I didn't commit any atrocities of note. Didn't do anything. Okay. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Bob Hemphill. I'm the author of a book called Platoon, Bravo Company. You'll see where we got the title in a minute as we go along, I think. It's published by Sergeant Kirkland's Press down in Fredericksburg, Virginia. You know, when you go out somewhere to promote a book, when it's your first book, sometimes you're a little reluctant to toot your own horn, in effect, because you feel like you're bragging or something like that when you really don't want to. I've been told to toot loudly tonight, so... Huh? Toot your own horn. I'm sorry? I said I've been told to toot loudly tonight. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll give you a little bit of my credentials and my background to show you where I come from to write the book. I spent 25 years in the United States Army, retiring as Lieutenant Colonel in 1989. I spent 2 tours in Vietnam. My first tour, I was in 25th Infantry Division, which is where the tour of the book came from. During that time, which is 1967-68, I commanded Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry. And after my time in command, which was almost 5 months, then I went back to battalion staff and spent the rest of the tour as the S2 and then the S1 at the battalion. My second tour, I went to the Vietnamese side of the house, if you will, as an advisor. That was 70-71. I spent 4 months down on a province team in An Giang province in the town of Cà Mau. Southernmost province in Vietnam, more Navy than Army, 2/3 underwater, and the only road in it was the road out, if that gives you an idea. That got a little boring, so after about 4 months there, I went to the 9th ARVN Division. ARVN's the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, 9th Vietnamese Division, as an advisor to the 3rd Battalion, 15th Regiment of the 9th ARVN Division, where I spent 6.5 months advising the Vietnamese. So that's my Vietnam any of those things. My Lai was not in my company. I've never smoked a joint. I never used drugs other than what the doctor prescribed or I got over the counter at your local giant pharmacy or somewhere like that. Huh? No, I saw nobody doing it. But I haven't been accused of any crimes other than occasional speeding ticket, parking ticket, that kind of thing. Nobody has beat down my door, and I've never barricaded myself in and held everybody off for hours. I draw disability from the VA for a broken back and screws in my leg, not a screwed up head. And I have general orders and official military records to support all my decorations and awards. I don't wear things that I'm not entitled to. Therefore, I'm a total failure as a Vietnam veteran, right? I can't possibly be a Vietnam veteran. I don't fit any of the stereotypes. But I tell you, folks, I and people like me represent the vast majority of the 2.7 million men and women actually stationed in Vietnam. The real story is the vast majority fit none of those stereotypes. The vast majority of folks came back to this country after Vietnam. Some of them stayed in the military, believe it or not, like me. Others got out, went back to their hometown, and became productive citizens in this society. They don't stand around at every Veterans Day and Memorial Day wearing grubby old fatigue parts, long beards, long hair, dirty, crying at the wall and stuff like that. And when somebody checks them out, checks their records, these guys were never in the Army or never in Vietnam. There's a new book out in addition to mine. If you want to hear, huh? Against the law to wear medals, not against the law to cry at the wall. Well, nobody's going to prosecute them for saying, hey man, I was in Vietnam. If they come up wearing a full, correct military uniform of a captain or something like that, and they're not doing it, then they can be prosecuted for impersonating an officer. And there are people who have been. There are people who have showed up or who have involved themselves in the community, pretending to be soldiers, wearing uniforms, wearing medals, wearing stuff like that, that finally were found out, and some of them are in jail now. Problem is, they're not all in jail now. A lot of them are still out there, still pretending to be Vietnam veterans, still pretending to have earned a lot of medals that they didn't get, and so on, and making the rest of us look bad. It's called an image problem. And with you and others, if you have a question while I'm going along, please ask it, okay? I'd rather this be a group discussion than a lecture. I much prefer to respond to things that you want to know about than to sit up here and yak at you something that I might want to tell you. So feel free to ask questions as we go along. Yeah, I don't mind at all. Okay. In 1973, I believe, when the negotiations were going on in Saigon between the Americans and South Vietnamese on one side and the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese on the other side, there was an incident where an American colonel, Colonel Harry Summers, found himself out on a smoke break with a North Vietnamese colonel. And he looked at the North Vietnamese colonel and he said, you know, you never beat us in Vietnam in the field. The North Vietnamese looked at him and said, you're absolutely right, Colonel, but that's totally irrelevant. They did not beat us on the battlefield of Vietnam. They may have beat us in the Congress, on the streets of America, and otherwise, but they did not beat us on the battlefield of Vietnam. General Norman Schwarzkopf has been quoted saying the same thing. The war was lost on the political side, not on the military side. Not on the military side. I spent 2 years there. I was never in a defeat. Nobody I know was ever in a defeat. There were occasional ambushes where our guys got shot up, or occasional small incidents, but not a major battle. We didn't lose a major battle. We didn't lose anything along that line.
Would you say they should have kept going? I've always been heard basically, when you go for a king, go for the throat.
Well, it depends on your mission. You have to understand the mission in Vietnam. Mission in Vietnam was not to defeat North Vietnam. We knew how to do that. Oh, I was talking about Vietnam. I just said Schwarzkopf said we did not lose in Vietnam. I wasn't talking about the Gulf War. Okay. To answer that question, though, yes, we should, but that's a different question. But in any case, at no time did we lose any major fight in Vietnam. There was occasion in 1971 or somewhere in there, a big incident that was publicized a lot called the defeated Firebase Marianne, where there were some guys who went to sleep on the perimeter and so on and allowed the VC to sneak in and they blew up the firebase. But they didn't get out, you know. There was a reaction force that came into the firebase and took care of it. But we just flat didn't, yes.
So as a matter of historical fact then, like the battles that were going on during the Tet Offensive, that was, in fact, then a U.S. military victory.
A tremendous U.S. victory.
Although it was through the papers and some of the media, as I was pretty young then. I was about 15 then when that happened. It seemed to be just the opposite the way it was portrayed.
I'm glad you asked that question, because that's one of the biggest misunderstandings of the Vietnam War is the Tet Offensive. Tet Offensive is known as a turning point on the civilian side here in America, where the support for the war. Don't forget, when we went into the war in 1965, 85% by poll, the American public supported us going there. Okay, 85%. Now, what happened with Tet? Tet was a major victory for the Americans and their allies. The Viet Cong basically ceased to exist after Tet. I left there in 68 after Tet.